I feel like introductions make me seem a whole lot cooler than I am. I'm just a normal guy. And I got this shirt on because they lost my luggage. Well, they lost it, and then I called them, and I said, what do I do? They said, well, go buy whatever you want. And I said, well, do I have a limit? They go, no. I said, okay. So I went at like 8 o'clock when I landed here a few days ago, and this is the only shirt they had at H&M that fit me, so don't, y'all are judging me. I am a guitar player, if you didn't know that, though. So, they were singing that song earlier, evidence is all around. The atmospheres are changing now, and I was thinking of something Michael Culiano said, and, rooms like this without Christ have a different purpose. This, I think, would be what an auditorium or a theater room, but the moment the king shows up, it becomes a sanctuary. Culiano says this, he says, baptism is interesting because until Christ embodies the water, it's just a bath. But the moment he embodies the water, it becomes a grave. So some of you went right over your head. Some of you are like amening, but you don't know why. I wanted to speak this morning on writing history, but God actually loves writing history with us, not just for us. And I think sometimes we have this mindset that God's going to just do everything for us. And I want to encourage you this morning that his ability to fulfill his call over your life is far greater than your ability to screw it up. I heard someone say, man, I'm so terrified to let God down. I said, oh man, good thing you don't hold him up. If you've come into this auditorium this morning and you feel heavy and you feel like, man, I'm just coming because my wife made me come, or I'm coming because, whatever, they were going to take me out to Denny's later, or whatever reason you're here. I want to encourage you that it doesn't matter how you came in, you could actually truly leave different. The disciples, it was interesting when you look at their lives. They would say that the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, was about 54 days of their walk in life with Jesus. So what does that tell you? That tells you that they left a lot of things out. Except John, he writes about Peter's failure in there. I look at the disciples, and I don't know if you've ever, if you grew up Catholic, you might have this, weird view of the disciples wearing, halos. They were men, okay? I mean, you could totally see their deficiencies. You have John, who has this weird animosity with Peter. He does. I mean, he even writes in his gospel Peter's failure. That's jacked up. And then he also puts John, the disciple whom Jesus loves. He also put in there, and Peter and John ran to the tomb, and John outran Peter. They had to have been Hispanic, I don't know. And then you got the other guys that, they're fighting over who's the greatest, and then they send their mom. Have you not looked at the humanity of these guys? I mean, they were far from perfect. And the problem is sometimes when we read the scriptures, we only can see the divinity of God, but you forget that there's a major part called humanity. And the disciples understood a concept. A lot of people said, I would be so cool to walk with Jesus. Do you think, Brian? And I said, to be honest, I don't. And they were like, well, why not? I said, man, you have Jesus, right? He's perfect. He's amazing. He walks on water. He heals the sick. He raises the dead. And then there's you. And the disciples, though, they understood a concept that I believe is valuable this morning for you to understand. It said it's not what they had, it's who they had. I want to tell a story this morning. I'm a storyteller. I'm a spiritual son of a guy named Lou Engle. I just don't rock like this, but I've learned to tell stories. Stories build the faith. In the beginning was the Word. The Word became flesh. And so what religion does is it likes to make flesh become word again. But when you tell stories of what God is doing currently in today, it lets you know that the Word is still alive and active. Not that I add to the Word, but it shows you, hey, this Word is still moving today. I want to tell you a story that took place some years back, just in honor of the elections and all that happened. This is not a political story, by the way, but it did really happen. If you know anything about my life, I come from a divorced family, abusive home for 10 years till my parents split up. And my life was far from perfect. I was actually born in Anaheim, California, at the Kaiser that doesn't exist anymore. You guys remember that old Kaiser? I was born there. 34 years ago, 35 years this year. Two teenage parents, they got pregnant, ran away. Everyone thought they were dead because there was no cell phones back then. They ran away, didn't call anybody for a year till I was born. Then they show up with me on the doorstep. And, my life has had interesting interjections and things that I've been able to be a part of. But probably one of the craziest things was, I believe it was in 2018, I got invited to President Trump's house in Mar-a-Lago. Now y'all are interested, right? None of y'all cared what I had to say before that. And I could really only preach this in the Orange County area. I don't know if I could say this in LA. I know you're all Trumpers. Anyways, so am I. So I live in Texas. Anyways, so I get invited to President Trump's house. And this is not a political story, but this did happen. This is in 2018 before he was popular. So we get invited, but it's not a political thing. It's actually a fundraiser for orphans in Africa. And they were inviting people to raise money. I don't know why they invited me. I don't have any money to give them. But I get invited by this very wealthy family that's going. They said, can you just be our guest? And they said, but you got to wear a tuxedo. I said, I don't own a tuxedo. They said, we'll rent you one. So they rent us one. We fly there. And we get there. And now I've never been to any place like this before that's this fancy. I come from the generation where 5-star restaurants were Olive Garden and Red Lobster. I asked my kids, what do you want? I'm actually watching my kids the next 4 days by myself. My wife's going out somewhere. And so I'm like, well, where are you? What do you want to eat? They go, hibachi. Or my son, he's 4. He goes, I want Crab Shack. You want Crab Shack? Like he likes peeling lobster, and this kid's crazy. So I go to this house, and it's super fancy. It's Mar-a-Lago. So I get there, and I walk in the backyard. Everyone's in tuxedos. Everyone comes from money. And I'm sitting there with a few people. I was there with a few friends of mine, from Brian Brent from the Circle Res when he was alive. He was there. And then another guy named Nick Vujicic. He has no arms and legs. He's been a friend for a long time. So we were there together in the backyard. And I'm in a tuxedo, and I noticed there's this mountain of sushi in the back. And I'm like, oh, dang. And then there are all these waiters that are walking around with filet mignon, and they had lamb chops with green jelly. I've never seen that before. And they're walking around, but I have one question. Is it free? Because I'm not trying to load up my plate and get a bill after, So imagine I'm in Mar-a-Lago. I tell the waiter, hey. I go, is that free? He goes, yes. I start loading up my plate, right? So I'm putting sushi on it, but I don't know. No one told me this was the appetizer. So then they're like, all right, everybody, we're going to move into the main dining hall. And there was rumors that President Trump was going to be there. So Secret Service was already on the grounds, and there was rumors he might be there, but I didn't know. So we go into this dining hall, and I'll never forget, there was the big dining hall, but before you walked in, it was this transition room where you had harp players. You come to my house, you're getting a Bluetooth speaker, you're not getting harp players. So we go in, and it was the craziest dining hall. It was like Beauty and the Beast, beautiful. And I knew that I was in a rich place when there was a plate for my plate. I come from a single-parent home. It was illegal to use glass plates. We used paper plates, plastic forks, and pixie cups. My dad was not doing dishes. So we get in there, we sit down, and we have this amazing meal. And so then I'm done eating, and I'm over here talking to Nick Vujicic. And you guys know anything about Nick Vujicic? So he was actually born without limbs. He has one little foot. He calls it his drumstick. He said God gave him one foot to stomp on the devil's head. If you've ever been around Nick, he's actually pretty funny. When little kids say, what happened to you? He looks at them, and he goes, cigarettes. So. Yeah, traumatize a whole generation from smoking. There was this one story he tells where he was in a plane, and he asked the pilot if he could use his hat. So he puts the pilot hat on, he's standing in the front, and he's greeting everybody. So they get on the plane, and he gets on the intercom. He goes, hello, everybody. This is Nick Vujicic. We're going to be trying some new technology today. Anyways, you got to get Nick's humor. So we're in this place, and Nick's in his wheelchair. And we're just talking, and this guy runs in. He goes, President Trump is coming. And I was like, hey, President Trump is coming. He goes, no, he's not. I go, yeah, he is. This guy just said he's coming. He goes, he's not coming. I go, yeah, he is. I go, let me see. So I look, and as far as the eye can see, his hair was shining as bright as the morning sun. I'm like, dude, he's coming. And Nick's like, zzz, So he starts zooming in, but Secret Service start flooding the room. And they're like, everybody get back, get back, get back. But Nick's like, zzz, goes right in. I mean, you're not gonna push a guy with no limbs, you know? That's messed up. So he zooms right in. And Nick's caretaker was a friend of mine named Peter. And Peter's like, hey, I'm with Nick. And Secret Service goes, okay, go ahead. And I was like, I'm with Nick too. And they're like, go ahead. I'm like, yes. So I'll never forget this. I actually have a picture of this if you don't believe me. But I was standing here. It was Nick Vujicic and it was President Trump. And I knew my mom wasn't going to believe me, so I was taking a bunch of pictures. And I literally had this thought. I said, oh my God, like first of all, I said, how did I get here? Like, I start remembering my life and all the stuff I'd gone through. And I said, there's nothing that equates to where I'm at all. I can't go back and say, oh, because of this and this and this. And I literally had this thought, I'm here because of him. And some of you are like, Jesus, no, Nick. All you religious people, it's the Lord. No, it was Nick. I was literally there because of Nick. And I thought this must have been what the disciples thought when they found themselves in places they never would have been without him. It's not what you have, it's who you have. You know, I made a friend years ago named Todd White. I might have shared a few of these stories before, but you guys have a guy named Todd White? I met Todd in 2014. First time I ever met him. When I gave him a hug, his dreadlock went in my mouth. We were friends ever since. And Todd is one of the most interesting guys to be around. If you've ever, how many of you know there are people that are like Christians, and then there are people that are so Christ-like you don't feel saved? You ever been around those people? No? Get some better friends in it. I mean, Todd's one of those guys. So I've been around, different places with Todd, and there was this one time we were at a Whole Foods, and we checked out and we're getting ready to go to the car, and he goes, "Hey, buddy." So he talks. He goes, "Hey, buddy, just go get in the car. I'll be right back." I said, "Okay." So I go in the car, and I'm kind of looking at what he's doing, and he starts talking to this like punk rocker guy who's in the parking lot. He works for the store pushing the grocery baskets. So he's talking to him. I turn around, I get in the car, I pull around. By the time I pull around, the guy is on his knees in the parking lot with his hands raised, weeping. I mean, that was like a minute turnaround, I'm like, what happened? So Todd gets in the car. He's like, "All right, buddy, let's go." I'm like, "Well, what happened?" He goes, "I just went up to him, and the Lord gave me a word for him." I go, "Well, what did he say?" He said, "The Lord said to tell him that this morning he loaded a gun, and he put it by the side of his bed. And he told God if he was real, that he would send a sign today, and that I was his sign." And the guy said, "This morning I loaded a gun, I stuck it by the side of my bed, and I told God, if you were real, you'll send me a sign today." He goes, he gave his life to Christ. All right, let's go. I'm thinking, all right. There was another time I was with Todd. I don't know if I've shared this, but I was with Todd, and we're actually driving. It was one of the first times I was driving him in LA. And you all know LA traffic is demonic. If you don't speak in tongues yet, just drive on that freeway at about 1:30, and you'll speak in a tongue. So I was driving with Todd one time, and I was having a rough day. I never forget, I was having a rough day. And I look over at him, I'm like, "Man, have you ever had a bad day?" And he goes, "Not in 10 years, buddy." And I was like, "Yeah, me either." So we're driving, and all of a sudden, this motorcyclist loses control in front of us and wrecks. And so me being a good Christian, I put my blinker on, and I'm going to go around this guy. And Todd looks at me, and he goes, "Hey, buddy, stop the car." And I'm like thinking, I tell him, I go, "We're on the freeway." And he goes, "Hey, buddy, stop the car." And I'm thinking to myself, I don't know what y'all do on the East Coast, because we live at that time. I go, but on the West Coast, we don't stop cars on the freeway. And he says it a third time. He goes, "Hey, buddy." I mean, it felt like it was Jesus. "Do you love me? Do you love me?" If you didn't laugh, I know you don't read your Bible. So we're driving, and I pull over, and Todd jumps out on the freeway, and he runs to the guy. We're in LA. And so I quickly park my car. I get out, and I walk over, and I walk into this conversation. Now imagine, this guy's riding his motorcycle. He wrecks, scrapes his bike. He's probably hurt. And Todd is there talking to him. The first thing I walk into Todd saying is, "Hey, buddy, you need Jesus, man." I'm thinking to myself, this is the worst time to tell anyone about the Lord. Guy just wrecked his bike, and the guy goes, "I don't got time for that." And Todd goes, "You almost died. You think it's time now?" And I was like, ooh, he got you. And the guy goes, my parents go to church. And Todd goes, that don't mean nothing. You need Jesus for yourself. And the guy goes, fine, I'll receive him. I was like, how'd you do that? And so he leads the guy to Christ on the freeway. No pulpit, no lights, no worship team, nothing. And Todd goes, wait right here, I'll be right back. So Todd goes back to the car. I follow Todd because I don't want to awkwardly be standing with this guy. Like, hey, how's your bike? So I go back to the car, and Todd grabs a wad of cash. And Todd goes up to the guy and he goes, hey man, all your life Christians have been hypocrites to you. He goes, yeah, they have. He goes, you've even had Christians rob you of money. He goes, how do you know that? He goes, my father told me, and my father is no thief. And he puts some money in the guy starts weeping. The guy's like, who's your father? I'm like, who's your father? And I've watched time and time again, God not write history for people, but with them. When you look at John chapter 6, I want to read you this verse here. John 6, there's something that's taking place in the scriptures that's very unique. And in John 6, Jesus is with his disciples. And, Jesus was not an insecure leader, okay? He wasn't sitting there, even though he was the greatest, he really desired to write history with his boys and the women that followed him as well. But you get this, his desire was that his disciples would make memories and he'd write history with them. You can see that all throughout the Gospels. So Jesus is with his disciples in John chapter 6, and a large crowd had gathered to them, but there's an issue that arises. They're hungry. And Jesus is not just thinking spiritually, he's thinking of their stomachs. So he's with all his disciples. I want to start off here in John chapter 6, verse 1. It says, after these things, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. A large crowd followed him because they saw the signs which he was performing on those who were sick. And then Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was near. Check this out. Therefore, Jesus, lifting up his eyes and seeing that a large crowd was coming towards him, says to Philip. Hold on for 1 second. Hang here with me. So check this out. No, I asked him to come up here. That's what Lou does all the time. He's like, come up here, sit down, come up here, sit down. So hold it for me. So I want you to get this picture real quick. Jesus is here. He's talking to his disciples. Massive amount of people have gathered. There's no social media, no hashtags, don't meet me at the mountain, nothing. They've come to see the man that is healing everybody. Jesus recognizes that they're hungry, and that I can imagine what goes on in the mind of Jesus. He's like, you know what? I have an idea. We're gonna do a miracle right now. But the guy that he chooses to do a miracle with, you don't really see him mention many other places. It was a guy named Philip. You don't really see and Philip walked on water, and Philip healed the blind. I mean, Philip was a disciple, but he wasn't like he was putting his name out there and doing great exploits. I mean, he might have, but it wasn't really written in here. So I can imagine Jesus is thinking in this moment, we're gonna get his name in the book. We're gonna do this. He's a little shy. So he calls him over. Imagine, he says this. He says, lifting up his eyes, or lifting up, seeing the large crowd was coming towards him, he says to Philip, where are we to buy bread so that all of these may eat? Could imagine Jesus is thinking, how many of y'all remember math class in school? Anybody remember math? Some of you are traumatized. You remember math? How many of you know the odd answers were in the back of the book? I mean, if you got those ones wrong, there is something wrong with you, seriously. This is like one of those moments hey, where are we to buy bread so that all these may eat? I can imagine Philip's like, man, I don't know. Jesus, he's talking to Philip, and Philip answers the worst answer. Says, the next verse says, then Jesus, it says, he was saying these things to test him, for he knew what he was intending to do. Next verse, Philip answered and said, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, for everyone to receive even a little. Could imagine Jesus is like, wrong answer. Looking at John, don't you dare write that, John was just waiting. Go ahead, say it. Y'all have friends like that? And all of a sudden, find about 200 denarii worth, just in our terms, is 8 months worth of paychecks. significant amount of money. Philip was saying, hey, 8 months worth of paychecks, man, is not even enough to feed these people. And all of a sudden, there's an interruption that takes place. There's an interruption. I know it's an interruption because there's no invitation to the conversation. How many have kids? How many of you know children, all they do is interrupt most of the time, right? I mean, we were in Argentina one year, and we were getting like prayed for by like this white guy, Claudio Frasian, his name, revivals in Argentina. And my son, as he's like laying hands on me, he's trying to stick a candy in my hair. And I'm thinking, just wait till he's done praying. You know, like children have no grit. Well, here you see Andrew, he has no grit. He interrupts the conversation. It says Andrew, one of the disciples, Andrew, who was who? Who remembers who Andrew was? Peter's brother. Have you connected that yet? Peter's brother? Like you're the brother of Peter? Like your brother walks on water? I mean, talk about bragging rights. Y'all have siblings? How many know sibling rivalry is real? Imagine your brother walks on water. Oh, your brother also got the revelation of who Jesus was. He's the Christ. He probably didn't even know. He just guessed. And then your brother gets invited to the VIP meetings with Jesus on the Mountain of Transfiguration. And then there's you, Andrew, who's just kind of tagging along. You don't think that they had conversations as brothers? Come on, take divinity out for a second. Think about the humanity. Long walks with Jesus. You don't think the day Peter walked on water that night, Andrew was like, yo, what was it like? I don't know what Peter would have said. You know, it was dope, bro. Go to bed. You know, I don't know. But could you imagine those conversations? I like to imagine, at least for me, if that was my brother, there would probably be this almost righteous jealousy of like, when's my turn? Like you get to walk on water. When is it my turn to write history with this guy? Because I believe he's a rabbi even before you believed. And all of a sudden, Andrew interrupts this conversation. It says here, one of the disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him. So you have Jesus, Philip, Andrew interrupts the conversation. He goes, there's a boy here. Exactly what it says. No context prior to that. There's a boy here who has 5 loaves and 2 fishes, but what are these for so many? Is that not the most random interjection? You can just play. Random interjection. Imagine I go up to Pastor. Pastor, there's a boy here. Pastor would probably be like, good job, Brian. There's a lot of boys here. I mean, there's 5,000 recorded people, not including women or children. Imagine this for a moment. 5,000. So check this out. How many of you ever grew up in church? Anybody? No, like you legitimately grew up in church. Anybody? Like you were born on the pew, right? How many of you, if you've grown up in church, how many of you were ever forced to go to church at least once in your life? How many know this is the worst thing on Sunday? Number one, there's 2 problems with Sunday school. Number one, it's on Sunday. 2, it's called school, okay? Now imagine this for a moment. Sunday morning, right? You're a kid. It's like church starts at like 10. It's like 9 brunch and cartoons, right? And all of a sudden, hey, get up. We're going to church. You got 5 minutes. And how many not only were forced to go to church, but you had those parents that love to go late all the time? Not only did they like to go late, they like to sit in the front. How many of y'all know what I'm talking about? And then you got to do the walk of shame, right? All the ushers. I like to imagine that if we were forced at some point to go to church, it might have been the same for some of these people in the Bible. Why not? Except that interaction wouldn't have looked like that. It might have looked like this. Hey, get up. The Rabbi Jesus is going to be speaking. Come on, we got a 2-hour walk. Could imagine this family. I don't know where they walked from or where they came from, but however long it was, they didn't have a car. They probably walked to this meeting. And imagine his mom gets there and there's 5,000 to 10,000 people. His parents go, you know what? We're going to go to the front. I can imagine this boy being taken through thousands. And he got one thing on his mind. He's not thinking about the message. He's not thinking about the rabbi. He's thinking about his Jewish Lunchable. Well, how many of y'all have ever been to church? Be honest. How many of you ever been to church and you're like, dude, just shut up. I'm so hungry. Finish that, right? It's normal. You sit there, you're hungry. Imagine this boy, he has his Jewish Lunchable on his mind, and he's sitting there in the front. Well, how do you know he was in the front? Because Jesus would not have been able to see him or Andrew if he was in the back of 5,000 to 10,000 people. He had to have been in some vicinity where he was in eyesight of Jesus. And all of a sudden, Jesus looks at this boy and pretty much says, hey, can I have that? And the boy wasn't like, what are we talking about? The boy gives him his lunch, and history is written. I was reading that one day, thinking about how complex we've made ministry. Can I be honest? We've made ministry this. So if you don't have a mic, if you don't sing like this guy, I guess you're not really doing ministry. You know, I was reading this one day and I thought, man, if Jesus could write history with the lunch, what could he do with the life? What could he do with the wholehearted life? You know, guys, you remember my story about my sister that I preached 2 years ago? Remember that? My sister who was on drugs. She was actually a homosexual, on drugs, got radically saved, totally backslid, was being sex trafficked in Figueroa Street here in LA and in Sacramento, was put on fentanyl, detoxed on my couch. I brought her to rehab. The guy that beat her up and was trafficking her only got 3 months. That really messed with her. So she gets out of rehab, comes back to Sacramento. It's been clean of drugs ever since. 2 weeks ago, I get a text message from my sister. Hey, can you talk? I hate text messages like that. How many are from that generation, right? Well, I put a few emojis in there or something. Let me know you're okay. So I said, what's going on? And she goes, no, it's not bad. Remember the last time I got a text like that was, hey, my face is beaten. I'm on drugs. Help me. So I answer this text and I answer this text and I go, what is it? She goes, can you call me? So I call my sister and she goes, Brian, you're not going to believe it. I said, what? She goes, I'm married. I go, you're married? Who'd you marry? She goes, Brian, I married a guy that I've known since middle school. He's been my friend the entire time I've been on drugs, when I was trafficked. He gave his life to Christ and asked if I could move in with him. And I said, no, I won't move in as a girlfriend, only as a wife. He goes, I get paid Thursday. He went and got a ring, and they got married. You know, this is my sister now. I want to show you this. And to you, you might see a couple or even have 1,000 thoughts of why you think this is crazy. You know what I see? Redemption. But the ultimate test was my grandma, because she talks crap about everybody. Y'all have a grandma like that? Hispanic grandmas are like the worst. So I'm already thinking, oh, you're screwed. Grandma's gonna hate this, right? My grandma's actually, she's dying slowly. She was a field worker for a lot of years and all the chemicals are in her lungs. And so she's on a breathing machine. She's still hilarious. That hasn't stopped her from being funny. And she just speaks her mind. And so my sister goes, Grandma, I want to let you know that I'm married. I married a Christian man. And she goes, you know, Z, she goes, I asked the Lord to see one miracle before I died. She goes, seeing you married was my miracle. You know, when I was on the phone with my sister, I FaceTimed when they did her reception. And I said, I want you to know something, Z. I said, I don't tell your story because I'm trying to get laughs or trying to get sympathy. I said, I tell your story because out of 17 years of following Christ, I've witnessed a lot of things. I've preached in stadiums. I've seen high school saved. I've seen thousands come to Christ. I said, you are my greatest miracle that I have ever witnessed. But you know what's wild about her story is God didn't write her story for her. He included me in it and he wrote it with her. He doesn't desire to do it for you. Just like here with this boy. You know, Nick Vujicic, I mentioned him earlier, born with no limbs. Y'all know how Nick started preaching? So Nick was bullied when he was a kid, obviously being born with no limbs. He actually tried to commit suicide when he was a kid. He jumped into a pool and he was going to drown himself. And while he was at the bottom of the pool, a voice spoke to him and said, I have a plan for your life. So Nick swam up to the top. He could swim. Swam up to the top and he didn't kill himself. When he goes to school, high school, and there's a guy in his school that we've all seen. They look like this. You know what I'm talking about? The janitors. There's a janitor there who happened to be a Christian. And one day he looks at Nick in his wheelchair and he goes, hey, Nick, one day you're going to preach to all around the world. And Nick goes, preach? I have no limbs. Who will listen to me? Well, Nick goes and he preaches in his Bible club at that time. 2 kids come. I think one of them gets saved. And Nick knows he's called. You know, Nick Vujicic has now preached to over 700 million people. 1.2 billion have seen his videos. He's met with presidents and kings. Why? Because when the earth sees a janitor with a broom, heaven sees a prophet with a voice. And this morning, I just wanted to encourage you, and I've come to tell you that you don't need these great fancy gifts. All you need is a lunch. I remember when I was 18 years old and God called me to high schools. Actually, your church is a supporter of what we do in Jesus Clubs, if you didn't know that. Just in the month of January, we did a tour with the circuit riders, Jesus Clubs. Over 4,000 kids heard the gospel. We're in 47 states, 78 countries. But when God called me, I was 18 years old. I'll never forget it. I was in the back of a room, and I felt like the Lord said, hey, I want you to go to high schools. I'm going to save high schools through your life. And I literally told the Lord, you're crazy. I said, I can't even clean my room. I was so broken. And I remember thinking to myself, I have nothing to give you. And I said, but you know what I have? I have a voice. If you want to take it, you can use it. I have a life, you can take it. You know, for the first years of me doing ministry, my family was heavily against it. My dad said I was a good charity worker. I slept on couches and floors. I remember I made $150 a month living in LA. How many know that can't even buy you a fart out here, right? I mean, I was so broke. And there was this tension of like what God had spoken over where I was and who I was. It's difficult. But I remember every day just showing up saying, here, take my lunch. Take my lunch. Take my life. This morning I felt like this. I wanted to pray with you. I'm not asking you to look at the big, grand gifts you carry. I'm asking you to look at the small ones that you think are insignificant. You know, one of the most powerful things I believe in the body of Christ is the women, the moms, the grandmas. Seriously. You know how many times I was starving in a church? I didn't have any money. And I'd have those old Hispanic ladies, hey, you hungry? Oh, heck yeah. You know, I had to move out when I was 17 years old because my stepdad left our family. I was 17. He left a few days before Christmas. And my mom came to me and she goes, I love you, but I have 2 other kids and I can't afford you. I said, it's okay, Mom. So I moved out. And I had to move out. I didn't have anywhere to live. So I remember I went to youth group that night and I was just really distraught. And this family ended up taking me in from the church. His name was Chris Cox. And I'll never forget this guy. He was a white guy. I never lived with a white guy before. And I'll never forget this. One day, I get into it with him because I'm not used to the way he loves people. Him and his wife are so loving. I'm like, what's wrong with you? I'll never forget one day. I was like, I'm out of here. I was 17, about to be 18 years old, or maybe a little bit older at that time. I don't remember. But I said, I'm out of here. And he goes, hey. He goes, you ain't going nowhere. And he hugged me, and I started to weep. And I said, why love me. He said, my own dad doesn't even love me like this. That guy wasn't a preacher. He sold flooring. You know the guy who brought me to church wasn't a famous preacher. You know he drove a Bimbo bread truck? That was the guy that brought me to church when I got saved. The woman who was preaching, she wasn't famous. She had happened, I think, sub in that night for somebody. Everybody that's been the most impactful people in my life have not been famous. They've been faithful. And that's this morning when I want to encourage you. Would you stand with me? I want to pray for you. And whatever it is that you can bring this morning, as significant as you might think it is, a meal, loving the homeless, whatever it could be, pulling over for somebody on the street. How about this? How about your kids? I hear so many parents come, you work with Gen Z. What do I do to win my son? They don't love the Lord. I said, when's the last time you've gone to ice cream with them? When's the last time you've watched a movie with them? What do they love to do? It doesn't take much. Think about you and God. God doesn't come over and hover over you with all the mistakes you've made. In fact, it's quite the opposite. You know why he stuck the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the garden? Because if there was no tree, there's no choice. If there's no choice, it's not love. The greatest thing about this morning is you get to choose what you bring. I want to pray for you. Father, I thank you for Zion Church. I thank you, Jesus, that this is a church that will do much with a lunch. This is a church that will do much, God, with the little things you've given them. But I pray, God, that you would exponentially feed masses through this body. That their simple yes, Lord, would shift and shake eternity, God. I ask you right now that you would come this morning, you would break off shame and condemnation to feel like, what do I have to bring? Would you just take the next 30 seconds where you're at and just make this an altar of remembrance between you and the Lord, and just give him whatever it is this